Welcome to Biocanic's Health Intelligence Exchange community, where leading practitioners in integrative health approaches will discuss how they solve the most challenging and common health issues. These regular Q&A discussions are designed to take a deep dive into case studies and integrative approaches in order to elevate the collective knowledge of both experienced and new practitioners alike. Biocanic's Health Intelligence Exchange, your community for functional medicine.
All right. Welcome to the Health Intelligence Exchange, everyone. I'm Jeremy, CEO of Biocanic, and I'm joined today by our guest, Dr. Betty Murray. Today, we'll be discussing looking at hormones, metabolism, and overall health through the lens of bio-individuality. Dr. Betty Murray is a Ph.D. researcher, certified nutritionist, and Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. Dr. Murray is a Ph.D. researcher, she possesses a Master of Science in Human Nutrition Science and Integrative and Functional Nutrition, and earned her Ph.D. at Saybrook University, exploring the complex interplay of women's hormones and metabolism in women and with and without IBS. She leads a team of functional medicine experts in women's health as one of the first 300 certified functional medicine practitioners with the Institute for Functional Medicine. Dr. Betty has been a thought leader and a progressive force in the functional medicine movement since 2006. Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Betty Murray. How are you doing? Good to see you.
That was lengthy. It's awkward sitting here. It's like, wow.
Yes, lots of credentials. Looking forward to diving right in. So maybe just talk a little bit about your backstory and, what people may not know about you and kind of what you're doing today.
Yeah. So I think like most people that come to the functional medicine, integrative world, we all come from our own experience. And so for me, I've actually had three distinctly different careers. So I got out of college, sales and marketing, sort of went into that world, started managing. I was actually managing stores way back in the late 80s, early 90s. And then got swept into the technology boom in the 90s. So for those of you that are my age, that's in the dial-up days. And at the time, I was the first woman that was reporting to the CTO of the company I got hired into. I was the only woman in the department. And of course, like many women experience, I was working 3 times as hard for about half as much money. And I was working 80 hours a week, and I was burning the candle at both ends. And I'd had previous digestive problems, but they sort of ramped up under that stress. And when I finally, like many people, you sort of let it go until it gets too bad. When I finally went to the gastroenterologist, I was told I had colitis. And for me, I thought I was asking a legitimate question. I said, could I change my diet and change the trajectory of this disease? And this very overweight, very unpleasant gastroenterologist barked this laugh in my face and said it had nothing to do with what I ate. And, at the time I was like, well, that sounds like complete BS. Like, how can a digestive disorder have nothing to do with food? And so I started taking classes on the side while I'm still working 100 hours a week. And when I stepped into the nutrition classes, it was like, that's what clicked. Like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is why I was always a science or technical major. Like, that's really where my skill set was. And so I kind of dove back in, and I ended up leaving that corporate world, opening a clinic in 2006. I started the practice in 2004, opened the first multi-specialty functional medicine-based clinic in Dallas out of my own back pocket in 1,100 square feet with a nutritionist, a health coach, a counselor, and a physician and a massage therapist, and sort of, hung the shingle and said, let's go. And, we've grown over those years, and we can go in and dive into that. But when I hit my 40s, that's when it felt like the wheels came off the bus. I was able to get my digestive stuff under control, but I really went into kind of an early perimenopause at the end of, 38. And I had access to a lot of the best minds in functional medicine at that point. I was an OG. I was, there when they were much smaller than they are today. But I wasn't really getting the answers. And it took me till I was about 48 years old to go, okay, I'm going back and I'm going to finish my PhD, and I'm going to dig into particularly women's hormones and how we metabolize them and what's really happening, because there's a lot of black box in women's health. And I really felt, even though we're doing a great job of stepping into this arena, there's a gigantic gap. I was able to improve my health over that time, but that's really now my kind of hill I'm dying on. Is at this point, this is where I'm staking my, flag in the ground, and this is the mark I'm going to leave. So unfortunately, just like everybody else, it's my own health.
Everybody's got their own health journey in this space, right?
Totally.
So let's talk a little bit about bio-individuality when it comes to hormone replacement therapy. So, obviously we can't, not turn on the TV, and you got Get Roman and Hims and Hers and all these new opportunities. So maybe talk to us a little bit about your perspective on hormone replacement therapy, and specifically around your approach with bio-individuality.
Yeah. So, while I applaud the new efforts to get hormone replacement therapy back into the marketplace. So I think the first thing everybody needs to know is up until 2002, depending on what country you're in, about 40 to 70% of women, depending on the country, the Western country, were put on hormone replacement as standard of care. So we're acting like this is very new. And depending on the study you read, we're probably at a max point right now of about 7% of the female population that are in this time period that are actually getting treated. But the challenge is that because of that, the promotion is here, take some hormones, which hormones and how much, that is left to a lot of interpretation. And hey, if you don't have hot flashes or night sweats, then you're good, right? Well, I can tell you, I had a lot of symptoms of the well over 100 symptoms that go with menopause. Hot flashes and night sweats, I have never had, not a single one. So if my only marker of understanding it is a vasomotor marker, and that's what my doctor is sort of guessing their way through, that really lacks the understanding of we are bio-individual, and there's no way that you take 100 women and you line them up and they're all going to have the exact same hormone levels every time in their cycle. Because if you look at women and men, but like if you were to line up 100 women, every single one of us look different. The primary driver in the feminizing features for a woman is our hormone levels, right? So I have a nutritionist, Gabrielle, that works with me. She is 6'2". She is long and lean. I know I look like I must be statuesque, but I'm barely 5'3", and I got a badonkadonk butt with, junk in the trunk. I'm curvy, right? There is no way that Gabrielle and I have similar hormones because we would have similar features. So we have to kind of look at that. But then the other individuality that we know is that hormones are not just acting in a isolated form. They are active in every single tissue in the body. And particularly estrogen has this very complex detox or biotransformation pathway activity that it goes through that we now know has huge genetic variability in how we actually handle that. And depending on the person and their environmental exposures, like, phthalates and plasticizers and herbicides, how their body is going to metabolize and move through that process is highly individual. And so I think it's inappropriate to assume that we're just going to use symptoms as the marker of appropriateness. And I think it's also inappropriate to assume that everybody's going to have the same experience and their body's going to excrete these hormones in the best way possible. If you look at human exposure, everything was roughly organic on the planet until the industrial age. Maybe the Bronze Age, we had a little bit of exposure to non-organic things, but we're talking industrial revolution. The toxins that we have in our environment today are less than 300 years old, like 250, right? So we have a body that's really not prepared for what it's already being exposed to, and hormones have an interaction there. And so I look at all of that and I go, well, cool. I'm glad Hers and Hims and even MIDI Health and some of these other big brands that are doing a big promotion are out there. But the reality is that we need to individualize it because the science shows that we have the capacity to individualize. Medicine 1.0 is over. That's the blanket statement. Everybody gets the same dose. And here you go. We have the capacity to actually individualize so people get the right dose for them at the right time.
So kind of peeling back the onion, I'm sure people want to know, what do you do to get that objective assessment from the toxins, from an epigenetic, from the other factors? Like, how do you go about doing that assessment, or maybe a case study in that example?
Yeah. So I think everything that has to do with somebody's health's got to start with their health history and a full assessment of where they've been. So example, even if you look at if you look at some of this, the status of health outcomes, one of the biggest determinant is something that has nothing to do with your health. How much trauma you experienced as a child, right? And how much trauma you're experiencing right now. The health indexes, those questions of, have you been through a divorce? Did you have this? So early childhood trauma actually influences your health when you're 70, right? So health history is radically important. Where did you live? How did you live? What went on? Because that's going to inform your body. So that is first and foremost. So filling out a questionnaire online and then someone just getting it in a back office and kind of going, cool, you answered a couple questions about your health. And in most cases, if no one's going to talk to you about it, if you're a patient, you're like, I'm going to kind of half-assed fill this out because no one's going to talk to me about it. Doesn't really work. So obviously the intake is really important. Then there's assessment. So we often start with lab work. We always start with lab work in the beginning. Yeah. Is a woman who's menopausal going to have very low levels of, let's say, estradiol and testosterone and progesterone? Yes. However, she could have relatively decent, if not high levels of estrone, which is made by our fat cells, relative to those. So we look at all of them, right? We want to know where you're at when you start actual treatment. And then we generally, I don't prescribe, my team that prescribes starts low and goes slow. And we use a lot of feedback, both from, MSQs and sort of hormone history and how are you feeling today, and feedback from our application that sort of tells us, hey, where are they at in this process? And then we always check for how we metabolize it. So in an ideal world, I would love to see the DNA of how your body actually metabolizes things through the liver. So we can get those SNP profiles and those additional genetic profiles to already know sort of what you're wired to do. And then I think it's extremely important once somebody is in a position where they feel like things are kind of balanced, we feel like everything's good, we need to check how you move through those metabolism pathways through urine. There's multiple ways to test for it. So there's the Dutch test, which I think people are most experienced with. There's competitors like QMAP. There's also 24-hour urine hormone metabolites that has kind of been the gold standard. And so we use those to make sure we know what pathway your body detoxifies that estrogen through so we can help manage it. And then we adjust the diet and lifestyle and supplementation accordingly. And then we also use that to stage how somebody is moving through that process ongoing, because it's not a single snapshot and then you just kind of go, this is what it is, we're good, right? Because we're going to get exposed to new toxins, we're going to get new stressors in our life. So we also do maintenance testing to make sure that we're still on track. And so I think, history is really important. Knowing the DNA is really, really important. Testing and not guessing is really important. And then definitely testing how your body processes all of these hormones is really important. And then maintenance on an ongoing basis to make sure that something hasn't changed.
And then kind of peeling back the onion a little bit more on that, you mentioned using supplementation to manage estrogen detox. Do you have particular products or particular methodology that you use?
Yeah.
What do you look for and what do you use?
Okay, so I have a couple of my own products, but the reality is sometimes we step out of those too. So this is a really nuanced conversation. So urinary hormone metabolite testing, whether you're doing Dutch or HUMAP, there are some limitations of those tests, right? We get sort of enamored with our functional medicine tests sometimes, and we treat them like they're the end all be all, and that's not necessarily true. So I'm going to kind of quickly go through the steps at the liver so everybody kind of understands this. We have the first stage that's managed by your CYP or cytochrome P450 enzymes. Then the next stage is your conjugation enzymes like glucuronidase and glutathione. And then we have sulfation and glucuronidase, which are your primary pathways of moving your estrogens out. So for instance, estradiol has a heavy preference to go through glucuronidase at the liver, which is phase 2. And then that's going to go out predominantly through the stool, right? So it's very subjective to what's going on in your gut and the beta-glucuronidase levels that your bacteria are making. I happen to be one of the world's experts in that particular metabolite because that was a portion of my study. I know more about that than I ever intended to know. And so estradiol moves through that pathway. estrone, which is pro-inflammatory and a much less valuable estrogen, and actually a very concerning estrogen because it has ties to carcinogenic activity. And it's not just the 4-hydroxyestrone, it's estrone itself. And the thing is estrone moves through sulfation, right? So sulfation through the liver, which is also managed by this CBS enzyme, the SOLT enzyme, the SUOX enzymes. We have a bunch of enzymes and genes in that process that are basically, like, if you think if that's the last step to getting it completely out of the body. The challenge with all of these urinary tests is they miss that step. And it's because of the way the reagent type things work in the lab. They're using a glucuronidation method to test for it. So even when you're looking at a hormone metabolite test like a Dutch or something like that, you have to kind of put on a biochemistry hat and compare it against the other things that you know, right? So the other thing is we do check blood, right? Blood's easy to get, relatively inexpensive. I can check other markers like estrone sulfate, DHEA sulfate. I can look at some things so I can extrapolate what's missing from the Dutch test. So we actually use both. And so sometimes even when we have that kind of test, we have to go a little deeper and look at it because somebody may have problems in that area and you don't know it, right? So if you look at a Dutch test and you're like, hey, everything's great, that's awesome. So going back to your question about how do you supplement? So that's where it becomes more nuanced. So the idea that everybody gets DIM, like I hear this all the time. Like I'm in the backyard of BioT, of Vexapel, and what is it, Hormone Centers of America. So every pellet manufacturer is based out of Dallas, right? So everybody's enamored with pellet therapy. And even if you're watching and you like pellet therapy, we've done pellets and every other hormone we've done every hormone for 20 years. We've done pellets since the company's opened. So the challenge is the blanket statement is, oh, everybody needs to go on DIM. Well, DIM will excessively lower estradiol, not estrone. It'll do a little bit of both, but it has a preference for estradiol. So you could be overdosing somebody on DIM depending on how they move it through that pathway. Or you could be giving somebody hormones, but because you're dosing DIM so high, they're not getting the effect of it, where you might need hops or citrus bioflavonoids or flavonoids like curcumin or things like chrysin or green tea extracts. So sometimes we have to use different combinations according to what comes up. And so a lot of times we're looking for those nuanced pathways. So we might use a couple combinations of products. So I have one that's called Estro Balance Mastery that's got a little bit from both the 2-hydroxyestrone pathway and 4, but I'm not opposed to actually layering stuff on top of that depending on what we see. So I think that's the hard part is you have to almost have a little bit of a biochemistry bend to really understand it, particularly when you're working with those more complex patients that, you know, might have had, let's say, endometriosis, PMDD, fibroids, estrogen dominance, and like all those things. That should be your hat where you go, okay, they're probably going to have some messed up detox pathways. I'm going to have to dig a little deeper. I can't use just a very quick protocol that I would use with everybody.
You know, kind of shifting gears just a little bit, just to pick up on the beta glucuronidase aspects. It's obviously I'm very well aware of your PhD and, and approach. You know, how do those hormonal balances manifest differently in women with or without IBD, IBS? Like, what do you see from a beta glucuronidase? Like, how do you interpret that particular marker from a stool microbiome?
Yeah, so beta glucuronidase, obviously we have bacteria that produce it. We have a fair amount of bacteria that produce it. What's really interesting is our levels. Whoop, I just lost my camera. Hold on just a second. Let me figure out why.
No worries.
Yeah, sorry, people. We'll just figure out why that's happening. I'm going to switch to, there we go.
I was on Zoom for some reason. It always tries to jump on my iPhone, which is in a cradle. So,
okay, I don't know why it's doing that. Let me see. Sorry, people. Technical problems. Like it just like it's lit up. It says it's working, but it just like freaked out.
I was gonna say, if you hit the settings down below, you should be able to.
Yeah, I was just trying to change it, but it wants to. Let me kill that. Hold on. Sorry, people. Technical issues. I'm gonna turn that off. I'm trying to go to my FaceTime camera. It does not like that at all. Okay.
No worries. While we're waiting, if you do have questions, definitely post them in the chat wherever you're looking. We'll be grabbing those and switching to a live Q&A towards the end of this call.
Am I able to bounce out and bounce back in?
Sure.
Okay, let me just do that because I don't know why. It just, because my camera's lit up. It just did it. So hold on. Give me 2 seconds. I'll be right back.
No worries. All right. If you are watching live, definitely post those questions. We'll get to them while Dr. Murray joins us again. And we hope to have her back here in 1 second. For those of you that didn't get a chance to see our HICS Encore event last weekend, we are now promoting our next HICS in-person event, HICS Live 2025, which will be October 9th through the 11th here in San Diego again. Really looking forward to it. We'll have a great lineup of speakers, really immersive event with all of the different content focused on helping you streamline, scale, and grow your business. You can learn more about HICS Live at hix-live.com. It'll have all the information. We're gathering all of the speakers, so keep an eye out. Sign up for updates. We'll keep you informed as things changes and come along. Right, where is Dr. Murray? Hopefully she'll be right back. Never fails, probably doing a system update. So just a bit of backstory. So we met Dr. Murray through the Mindshare community. As we were digging into the beta-glucuronidase discussion, we actually at Biocanic were helping her analyze her data. So she had run thousands of different microbiome tests across different lab companies. We did the extract, provided her the beta-glucuronidase markers so that she could actually do her Ph.D. thesis, which was on beta-glucuronidase in women both with and without IBD/IBS. So it was really exciting to help her as she got her Ph.D. in this area of specifically women's hormones and IBD/IBS. So let's see. Hopefully there are some questions populating. There we go.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
It was the port on my laptop just bit it. So there we go. Technology.
Yeah, this is where my introvert style runs out of stuff to talk about, and I just can't be bubbly by myself. So anyway, we were talking beta-glucuronidase.
Yeah. So beta-glucuronidase, obviously we have bacteria that make it. What's interesting is the level of beta-glucuronidase bacteria changes according to where we are in our life cycle as women. So for instance, we see a natural increase in beta-glucuronidase producing bacteria as women enter perimenopause and menopause, right? And depending on our diet, we can either grow more or less of them. So obviously, if you have a less than favorable diet, you know, a diet that's lacking fiber and polyphenols and things like that, we often see a growth of beta-glucuronidase producing bacteria. But the thing that I was fascinated by was the natural shift, right? Like it just does. And so it's like, okay, is it a symbiotic relationship between the bacteria and the lack of estrogen and our body basically sort of working together going, okay, what little estrogens I have, mobilize them back out of the excretory pathway so they can be recirculated through hepatic recirculation. And there's some studies that sort of point that direction. You know, what I was really looking at too is we have estrogen receptors in the gut. We also have testosterone and progesterone receptors, the neurotransmitters. So epinephrine, norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine also have receptors in the gut, but they also are subject to glucuronidation, right? So all of those hormones and neurotransmitters go through the same pathway. So when I started looking at my research, what I wanted to understand was, you know, why as women, depending on what study we're looking at, it's like, you know, 2 out of every 4 women or 2 out of every 4, sorry, let me say that correctly. 2 out of every 4 people that suffer from IBS are women, right? Depending on the country. Then if you look at Western countries, that number starts to skyrocket, right? And some of it might be cultural. We have more language around it. Women are more likely to talk directly about it here than you might have in other cultures. And we see it change over our lifespan. So it tends to be worse when we're in reproductive time period, but then not as bad, right? When we go through menopause. So that's why I started looking at it, because I was like, is there a receptor activity that may be affected by the level of beta-glucuronidase and estrogen's role potentially with the symptoms of IBS? Because we also see the symptoms generally are worse towards the end of our cycle. And then some people will even transition into the follicular phase. What I found in my study, and I was using archival data. Thank you, Jeremy from Biocanic, my PhD. Holy crap. Oh my God. I can't even begin to say, like, I owe you so much for being able to pull data for me. But what I found was we didn't find a dramatic difference between women with and without IBS. We were looking at archival data, so there was no control, right? But when we started looking at subtypes, right? So when you start looking at IBS constipation, IBS diarrhea, a mixed case, we saw a definite increase in those with constipation, right? So what that tells me is, number one, if I was to do a controlled study, I'd want to get hormone metabolites at the exact same time as the stool test, exact same time of blood levels. And I'd want symptoms data at the same time, because I think what we would see is, depending on how somebody detoxes and what the preferential pathway is, we'd see some variability there. And it's because there's so much interaction between the microbiome and our body, and what is made available again from the stool to the liver through the hepatic recirculation.
Yeah. It was really great helping you out with that. We'd love kind of doing those kind of deeper analyses. And we're seeing a lot of great data for a lot of different functional medicine approaches as people kind of pull this together and drive individual outcomes. So maybe shifting gears a little bit. So obviously you have the clinic, but maybe tell the audience what you're building now and what you're working on, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I've had my clinic, Living Well Dallas, for 20 years now. So, and so we've been able to, help tens of thousands of women and men. Yes, we do see men, just a lot less numbers of them. I always ask if they're here by choice or force, because it's often the women in their life that, brings them here. And one of the things, because I came from a tech background, I was always looking at how do we add tech to make what we do better, and to also add scale. Because the challenge is, I don't know what the exact numbers are with IFM right now, but I literally was one of the first 300 certified, and that was almost 12 years ago now, right? Well, it was right at 12 years ago now. So, and I think we're only at like 4,500, maybe 6,000, but that's worldwide, right? So we have a scalability problem in medicine when it comes to what I consider good medicine, which is medicine 3.0, functional medicine. And so I wanted to be able to bring that together and also add scale. And so I basically, from that process, Minerva was born. So Minerva, for anybody who doesn't know who that is the goddess of science, medicine, and war. There's 3 different spellings of it. She's both Roman, Greek, and Etruscan. We happen to use the Etruscan spelling. And Minerva was born out of that. And Minerva is really right now 2 major areas in healthcare delivery. On one side, we have started expanding and providing the same level of care that we do inside our clinic for hormone replacement. And we've expanded outside of our 4 walls. And so for 2 years, I spent time vetting different telemedicine partners. And so last September, we started providing bioidentical hormone replacement across the United States. So we have licensed providers that handle the prescriptions and that are licensed in each state. And then we wrap our functional medicine and health coaches around that process to ensure that we're adding all that value. What I'm even more excited about is the technology platform that we're building that is going to drive the delivery of healthcare through telemedicine, but will be able to be licensed to practitioners. Because I truly believe, I think, if you look at functional medicine, so many people enter this space as providers, and often hormones is sort of this where they step in, right? It's the primary avatar is often a woman in their like 40s. And so this is always part of the conversation. But it's such a nuance, and anybody who's done it for a while will say, yeah, we get a lot of great results, but then we have a lot of outliers. And so what we're building with the technology platform is really a end-to-end women's health intelligence platform that starts out with basically the very first step is a woman, direct to consumer, could get on an app. And on that app, they'd be able to start tracking their symptoms against their wearable data, against all the stuff that they're already, looking at. Because surprisingly enough, 60% of women feel completely unprepared for menopause and also don't know what it truly is. So they're experiencing symptoms and they don't even know what those symptoms are because they're not sure if that's it. And they think it's something else. So imagine they now have access to be able to capture that data, get credible data back, including, studied data, using AI agents that can actually sort of respond back and answer questions. And then, nutritional recommendations, supplement recommendations. But then on the back side of that is we're capturing all that data. So we not only have the subjective symptom data, but we also have laboratory data. So we stop gatekeeping labs for women. At the end of the day, you should be able to order what you want and be able to look at it. But we want to add the dashboard capacity for someone to be able to see that without having to go through interpretation. But when they're ready to engage in care, then that's where for us, especially in the very beginning, while we're validating all those parts and adding scalability, my team comes in and we actually will prescribe in all 50 states. But we're going one step further than anybody else. There's app providers out there that give you symptoms data. There are companies that provide telemedicine, but nowhere do they meet and nowhere do they share data. And then the black box in medicine, 100% of the time, and it makes me crazy because when I look at studies, I'm like, you don't even know if the patient took what you prescribed. Like we use retrospective data and we'll go back and say in the EMR, they were diagnosed with this, they were prescribed this, so therefore they took it. And you and I both know, Jeremy, how many people are actually actually taking what they were prescribed? Not many, right? So we're also capturing titration data. So the most important thing to help us understand and to give credible recommendations for a practitioner is being able to capture the nuance of how women go through that, starting the process and figuring out their natural appropriate dose. And then we're also testing behind that. So we're capturing that data. So Minerva will be the largest women's repository of health data in and around perimenopause and menopause. Now, why is people might go, why is that important? Well, number one, nobody captures all of that data and brings it together in one place, right? Number two, it is separate from NIH, pharma, big medicine, big hospitals, right? So it is completely agnostic to the current system, the current, whether you love them or hate them, the current political environment is completely separate from that. What we're able to do once we have that data is obviously we can start being predictive, right? We can use AI predictive algorithms to start looking for patterns that are unrevealed today, and we can actually get in front of it. So imagine you're a woman who's 45, you've been tracking your symptoms. We go back, we look at 200,000 records and we're like, hey, this pattern shows up again and again. So we're going to tell Susan here, this is what we see. So if she makes these 3 diet changes and these 2, let's say, supplement changes for the next 7 days, her symptoms are going to be different because we now have data to show it. So it allows us to individualize. The other even more important thing, if we look at the top 8 conditions that women struggle with in the United States that have nothing for it, PMDD, PCOS, osteoarthritis, you name it, right? We have nothing to really help women. We also don't fund those studies. We have the capacity with that database to become a flywheel to create new products, services, and support for women with these other conditions. And we're not beholden to Wyatt or, GlaxoSmithKline, AbbVie, or whoever it might be, because we are separate from it. And so that platform, initially, my team will be running the back end, the telemedicine side. So we're validating, we're capturing data. But the goal is to eventually allow this to be a licensed product that practitioners and organizations, larger medical organizations, can use. So you can imagine you're a practitioner, you have this huge dashboard. Your patient's highly informed and very well aware of their own stuff, but you have the capacity to have all of that and the rigorous sort of recommendation algorithm to help you understand these very nuanced tests and how to make those decisions without having to spend 2 hours on somebody's lab work to understand it.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe, you've kind of taken a different tack from most of the practitioners, and now you're kind of a founder essentially. So maybe just describe your founder's journey and how it's been going in the startup world.
Yeah, it's funny. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's not really a startup. It's like a scalable version of what you've already built. But
yeah, it's actually that's a nuance that I would love to talk about too. So first and foremost, I went out to be an entrepreneur with a whole lot of bravado and naivete, right? When I started my clinic, I didn't realize there wasn't a tribe in 04, 05. I didn't realize that the vast majority of people didn't understand that medicine should be holistic and that nutrition's part of it. Like I had to learn the hard way. And so I bootstrapped my clinic, out of my own back pocket. So if I needed to do something, it came from my own pocket. So Minerva is the first time that I've actually, obviously looked at it and said, building a technology platform is an expensive endeavor. And it's a constantly moving target. So you have to have a runway of income and money to make that happen. So we know that less than, depending on what you look at, but I think it's like 1% of all female founders get funded, right? So what's interesting is when you go out to get funding, right? So I was joking earlier, it's like being live while watching somebody Tinder you, and they're constantly swiping the whatever way it is that you're not the one, right? In your face. So it's a lesson in rejection. And that's true for everybody. It's not unique to me. Like, I don't care who it is. The CEO of MIDI Health that's received $100 million will tell you it is a lesson in rejection. And I think there's several things. So I think number one, it's very hard for a woman to play in this arena. It's 100% all men's world. Even female founded angel groups and other things are slow to fund, honestly. And a lot of it is they write smaller checks and they're a little more cautious and hazard worried because they're newer to this game. And the other thing that I found very shocking is you have investors that invest in technology, right? So they're like, yes, I want to invest in a SaaS platform, or I want to invest in an app. And then you have investment companies that want to invest in a service-based business like healthcare. Right. And then you look at that. And one of the things that I have had the hardest time with is they're like, but you're an app. I'm like, no. like they can't understand that the solution is completely incomplete when you separate the two. Right. Because you have no outcome data if you don't know what the treatment is. Right. And that's the challenge in medicine, because our treatment data is actually inaccurate because we pull it from medical records that are inaccurate. And so I think that's first and foremost. That was something like what seems very, very understandable to me is very difficult for the simplified investor, because they're numbers people and they want to see something that's very easy. I can understand it in 5 slides. So that's something I've had to learn to adjust to. And I talk to Jeremy all the time and I'm like, okay, what do you do here? Dear Lord, because I'm also a typical entrepreneur. I'm impatient. I see the opportunity. I completely get what needs to happen. I'm like, just what's wrong with you? Why don't you understand it? So it's been a lesson in really kind of looking at it and going, okay, I've got to be patient and I've got to just play the game. And the other really weird thing to me is in one way, yes, we're taking a 20-year history of patient care that has outcome data that we know works, and we're applying technology to it, which is exactly, Jeremy, you would say this, never ever write software for something you don't already have a process vetted out for, right? You automate processes. You don't make a process on a software and then plug your stuff into it because it won't work. So, I look at that and I go, 20-year history, it's very obvious we know what we're doing. Even if we look at lifetime value and patient retention, we have extraordinary numbers for this industry. And investors look at the fact that I own a clinic as a drawback. They just flat out do. They're like, oh, we don't want to know about that. And I'm like, but that's what proves that I already did it. Like, no, we just, so there's this really weird nuances to this world because, you walk into an investment conversation and I'm like, I've already bootstrapped for 20 years and I already have outcome data and I already know what we do are working. We are just creating a new platform in which to scale it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's a lot of song and dance around that. And so I'm just, it's a lesson in rejection. And it's, but I went to South by Southwest and spoke on a panel this last weekend. And I was in several panels, watching other panels of CEOs that have raised money, all female founders. And 100% across the board were like, it's the most brutal, awful experience in the world. Because it is like going on dates and having somebody ugly reject you to your face. Like, you would probably say that too. I mean,
yeah.
And you have great conversations because I go into them and I'm like, I want to learn from you and I want you to tell me, what you think, right? So I go into it as I want to create a relationship here and I want to learn from you. And so for the most part, I get that experience, but you still walk away like, oh, that hurt.
Yeah. My favorite investor conversation was talking to they were two managing partners, and one of the partners was going to see the other person's functional medicine practitioner. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about long COVID and other things that sits well right within our industry. And at the end, they decided to pass because they didn't believe in the future of the industry. And I was like, you're the customer. Like, how? It's one of the most frustrating experiences for anybody that does go out and fundraise. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to make sure that you got your visibility in the struggles, because it is interesting from the other side, from my side, which is you see a lot of emphasis around female founders. It seems to be promotion. It's a female health opportunity. And they talk about it's the headlines, but it seems like it's just window dressing.
It's total window dressing because they keep saying they're putting money out there. But when you look, like if you start digging on Crunchbase and Pitch Deck and start looking at who's actually getting money, it isn't women founders. Mm-hmm. I have two stories. So I had a similar story like what you just said. I had two gentlemen I was meeting with for mergers and acquisitions, and we were going through the same thing. And one of the gentlemen looks at me, and he's a much older man, right? And he looks at me, and he goes, I'm on 15 different medications, and my doctor tells me I'm fine, and I was like, I finally had gotten kind of tired of the conversation. I go, but you're not my customer, right? Yeah. You're not my customer. My customer is your wife. And here's the thing, depending on what study you look at, females, particularly females in my age group, make 87 to 92% of all medical decisions. Where their spouse, children, and anybody goes, especially discretionary dollars, and whether they do anything preventative. And so I'm like, you're not my customer. I don't care what you think, right? Because your wife is the one going to tell you to go to the doctor. And then the other gentleman told me, he kind of patted my leg and said, you need to hire a white male CEO. And I said, thank you, but you can go ahead and go.
Wow.
I was like, okay. So it is an interesting time, but I do think the tides are changing. I just think it requires us to be on point, right? Mm-hmm. And women do have to, like, sorry, ladies, we have to show up already with the street cred, right? We have to work harder for it because that's just the way the deck is laid, right? And it just is.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I want to make sure we have some time for some questions. So we're going to transition to the live audience Q&A. Thank you to everyone that's been posting questions and comments. We'll get to as many as we can. If you're watching as a replay, feel free to push your questions in the comments. We'll make sure we get them over to Dr. Betty. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Coach Jen Winkler asked, how do practitioners like myself, non-licensed, find someone to prescribe bioidentical hormone replacement therapy for my clients? I can order labs and review them from a functional perspective, but I need someone to prescribe and monitor.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. So my company, Minerva, we have different programs, but our hormone program is designed to just do hormones. We do hormones and thyroid. We do look at metabolic hormones because we want to make sure that those are balanced. We look at glucose and insulin and IGF. But we aren't doing stool testing. We're not doing food sensitivity testing. We are staying in our lane. And so we are a perfect partner to either unlicensed practitioners that might be working with people on their gut and all these other things. And we are designed to continue to take care of them. Like, you don't get on hormones and do it for 3 months and then stop. And then we are also a really great partner to somebody who who might be doing group programs or has, patients in a particular area, but have a lot of people coming in from elsewhere, and you might be doing other things with them, because obviously the prescriber that's licensed in the state they're in, they have 100% decision making, right? At the end of the day, we might have opinions, but our practitioners take the same methodology to look at things. And so we have that same functional approach, but we're not everything for everyone. So we are a good partner. And it's the actual website is getminerva.com, and Minerva's MENRVA. So
yep. And we have it on the banner there.
Yep.
And then Jen had another follow-up. What is the pricing model? What's the cost per month? Is there minimal commitment? I think you talked about people can come in as a consumer at, I think, a free entry point, and then there's different levels that you guys offer.
Levels. Yeah. So we start with a test plus consult, because a lot of people are coming in and they don't really know where they are in that perspective and what's really going on. And we talk to them individually. So that test plus consult is $597. It's about $835 worth of labs, if you were to go to like Ulta Labs or one of those companies. And then our pricing model is $399 a month. And that includes all the labs that we do. And we sign patients up for a year, but once they've been in for a year and we've got them sort of balanced, it actually goes down a little bit the next year and ongoing. And we continue to lab test because we want to ensure that the right lab tests are done on a regular basis. So, and that includes working with a prescriber, functional medicine practitioner. And then we do have health coach Sherpas. They wouldn't necessarily like step on Jen's feet. They just are there to make sure people keep moving through the process and they're accountable.
Yeah, it as we talked about earlier, my wife, Jen, different Jen, had a perfect client, was getting into menopause, was interested in getting into BHRT, still wanting to do the same functional approach. And so that was, those are the great opportunities to kind of refer with the right partner.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we don't want to do those other things. We're staying in our lane.
Yeah. And then the follow-up question on that was, can practitioners become affiliate or ambassadors for Minerva?
Yes, we are working on that right now. There's some legal things we have to, so, unlicensed practitioners, it's a little easier, but if somebody's a licensed practitioner, we have anti-kickback and start laws we have to be attentive to. But yes, we will have those things for sure.
Awesome. Next question. Have you seen any changes in patients' hormones after they have done any trauma therapy, and what kind of therapies would have made the most positive difference?
I haven't, because I'm a scientist. So of course I'd be like, oh, I need to do a hypothesis and look at that. But could I anecdotally say yes? If you think about your hormones, so much of your hormones is based on your hypothalamus and your pituitary kind of getting feedback. And particularly hypothalamic feedback is everything from your chemistry, which includes limbic system, and your environment and all those other things. And so would trauma therapy absolutely probably have an impact? Yeah, because it's going to make a difference in cortisol, metabolized cortisol, adrenaline, which indirectly would affect overall hormone activity. I haven't dove into it, so I'm not trying to avoid the question. I haven't dove into it, but I would say anecdotally, absolutely. Now, would that help a woman who's in menopause bring back her hormones? No. Because the egg carton's empty. You can't manufacture estrogen out of the ovaries once the ovaries are done, but it can absolutely mitigate some of the symptoms for sure.
Awesome. The next question, as an entrepreneur, how have you kept balance with your life between personal and professional, but also how do you balance your different endeavors and stay healthy?
Oh, I hate it when people say you can have it all. That's bullshit. Sorry, am I allowed to say that? Well, I just did.
Of course, swear away.
You can't have it all at the same time. That's a reality, because at any given time you're picking and choosing the where you're putting your energies, time, and activities. I compartmentalize pretty heavily, so I literally have days that are like, I do still see patients, not many. I haven't taken new patients in a long time because I have a team, but I do. And when I do, that's the only thing I do that day. I don't have meetings. I don't talk about operational things. I don't do other stuff. Same thing if I'm working on, Minerva and I'm having investor conversations, that's what I'm doing that day. I think being able to do that and time block is really, really important to be effective. And that also means time blocking your time with your family, your exercise, your free time. There are times when my life is really, really all over the place, and I'm having to juggle a bunch of things because I also have a mom in an assisted living center who's 100% assist, and I'm her power of attorney. And closest family member. So there are times that I'm like, woohoo, I'm going to have something great going on. And then some emergency happens. And I think making sure that you take care of your reserves. So I protect my sleep like my life depends on it. I have spent a ton of money on my bedroom to make it perfect. A matter of fact, I slept at a JW while I was at South by Southwest and complained the whole time because it wasn't as good as my own bedroom. And I protect the things that help me regenerate, and sleep for me is really, really big. Exercise is big. I get in my exercise in very small bursts of time, so I don't have a lot of allotment. And then I do allow myself to cycle once on the weekend at least, because I'm a road cyclist, and that's where I sort of clear my head. But for me, it was really that compartmentalizing, and then sometimes having to say, this is not something I'm going to put my energy towards. Learning how to say no is really important. And being able to discern, is that an opportunity I need to follow? And I've honed that skill over time, because there's a thousand things that come at me. And then there's things that really aren't going to move the needle forward. So it's also getting that discernment is real important.
Yeah. Next question. Where do you see the future of personalized care heading in terms of addressing hormonal health, especially with advancements in genetics and microbiome research?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's why so much why I want to build, our platform, because we want to have the capacity to not only test for it, but research it, refine it, and keep building on it. Because we're just scratching the surface on the microbiome. A PCR, shotgun PCR is like old school, right? It's old school technology. We now have metagenomics, which is a whole nother avenue. And so I think it's going to be rapidly changing. AI and software is going to make it better, right? Because at some point you just can't, as a human, absorb all of that and pull it together. There's definitely parts, like I just talked to a gentleman that made a software called X Cures, which is just amazing in the cancer world. And so I think technology is going to play such an extraordinary role at helping assist really awesome practitioners become very precise. And so if people are scared of that, don't be scared of it. Embrace it, like run towards it, not away from it, because it can be very, very good at helping you do your job.
Yeah. Before we get to the next question, there's a question that we didn't touch on. So what are your thoughts related to hormone replacement therapy and things like cancer or breast cancer, because of the stigmatism that came out with the women's health study?
Yeah, I love this question. So first and foremost, the women in the women's health study that were on Premarin alone, right? So 13 estrogens, we only make 3 made out of horse pee. The women that were on that alone had a 23% reduced risk for breast cancer, period, full stop. If you look at previous studies that came out prior to the Women's Health Initiative, pretty much across the board, and it had been heavily studied, this is not new, across the board, estrogen replacement therapy did not show a perpetuation to actually start or perpetuate cancer in most cancers. And actually in many cancers, when you put estrogen into a petri dish with a cancer cell, you would see it die, right? That's not all cancers, and it's everything's unique. I think the thing that we have to understand is the most dangerous cancer we have for women's breasts is triple negative. No estrogen receptor, no progesterone receptor, no HER2 receptor. Right? It's aggressive, and caught early, it's pretty safe. But if that tumor gets large and expands outside of its arena, it is a high risk tumor. The reason why it's high risk is it's lost its entire function. Every cell in your breast has those receptors. Maybe not HER2, that's unique, but it has estrogen and progesterone receptors. So we chose to use that receptor as the treatment route for chemotherapy, right? So I look at it and I like, to me, everything's logical. Science is logical, right? And so the logic would tell you, if our estrogen caused breast cancer, then we should see breast cancer at extraordinary rates in women who are cycling, in women who have lots of babies because their estrogen's through the roof, in women who have longer menstrual cycle timelines from puberty all the way to menopause. But guess what? All 3 of those reduce your risk. Full stop. So it's not the estrogen, because that's not logical, because the average age of diagnosis in the US is 62, which means you are at much greater risk postmenopausally when you have no hormones. Here's my opinion. This is completely my opinion. This is why I went into this research, and it's why I want to build what I want to build. I think that When you don't have your naturally circulating estradiol, right, the protective estrogen, we have receptors on every single tissue in our body. You now have receptors that are open for estrogen-like compounds and estrone and hydroxyestrone and phthalates and all these other estrogen-like compounds, and they have full access to that receptor because there's nothing there to naturally block it, right? Tamoxifen is a synthetic estrogen. It just hits the estrogen B receptor harder. There's two receptors. B is cancer protective. A is cancer proliferative. So the reality is we're barking up a tree and trying to point everybody into this corner based on data that's not really accurate. Yes, there are times that women need to be off hormones. Maybe they have cancer and maybe it does stimulate them, but that doesn't mean they can't go on it. It doesn't mean they can't use it after. They definitely go on vaginal estrogen. And I think every person needs to look at it individually, but we're demonizing a natural hormone that absolutely isn't the primary driver.
Yeah, makes sense. For the last question, do you ever work with men for dealing with their hormones, and how do you address men?
Yeah, we do. So, it's funny because our pharmaceutical partner is like, you have to have men. I'm like, yeah, I've got a website for Minerva men. They're just not our primary focus at the moment. We do. And we look at the same stuff, right? Because men make estradiol. You can't shut off your estrogen, guys. You do not want to do that because when you do that, you cause bone loss and all kinds of problems. But the reality is you still metabolize testosterone and estrogen through those pathways. And so we still take the same approach. It's just going to be different, right? And so men deserve that sort of personalized care. It's not just slap some testosterone on a man and just go, hey, if you feel highly motivated, and you get a pump in the gym, you're good, right? It's more than that. And so we use the same methodology, right? A good method or a good framework is always good, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, listen, this has been a great discussion. I want to thank everybody who joined us today and those who asked questions. If you're still watching this as a replay, you can post your questions and get them answered live. Thank you, Dr. Murray, for joining us. Where can people follow and get more information about you and Minerva?
Yep. So they can go to Get Minerva, and that's GETMENRVA. You can also look me up at bettymurray.com. And then I do have a podcast called Menopause Mastery Podcast that drops every week. And so you can also follow me there and on Instagram at Dr. Betty Murray.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss any of our live streams. Join us next week when we have our best practices, our coffee circle. And then, next Thursday, we have Ryan Obermeyer from Avexia joining us. And then we'll have another great Hicks live event in 2 weeks. So thanks again. Appreciate it.